Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. It's Danny Haiphong. You are tuning in to another live stream here on the Left Lens. So, as you're coming on, please do like the stream. That's how you boost the algorithm. So, people see this stream, people see this conversation. Make sure that you're also subscribing to the channel if you have not already. And of course, the best way to support this work is on Patreon at patreon.com/Danny Haiphong. I'll just repeat that one more time before we get to our guest. Like the stream as you're coming in, because I know YouTube has a little bit of a lag. So like the stream, hit the subscription button, hit the notifications bell. And of course, the best way to support this work is at patreon.com/Danny Haiphong. So we got a two-parter today, two-part episode. First, we're going to start with a very special guest who broke some news about Ukraine that I think is very important. And then I will talk about Ron DeSantis and Jalen Walker, the Highland Park shooting. That will be the second half. So I'll be on about 90 minutes, maybe a little more. But we are going to start with a very special guest. I'm glad he's coming on. I've been following his work and the work of Morningstar for quite some time. He is Steve Sweeney. He's the international editor over at the Morningstar. And we're going to have a good conversation today about Ukraine and the recent banning of the Communist Party there. Hi, Steve. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me on, Danny. It's great to be here.
Of course, of course. Thanks for coming on. So let's get started. You reported on the latest news from Ukraine, which is that the Communist Party of Ukraine has been officially banned.
Yeah.
A court made the ruling. Was this yesterday that the ruling came down?
The final ruling came about yesterday. This was the 8th Appeal Court in Lviv, and it ruled that the Communist Party and all its activities were to be banned, and importantly, all of its assets, so its funding, its buildings, everything that it owns, all of its assets across the country are being turned over to the state. So essentially, the state has shut the party down and seized all its assets. Now, in effect, the party was already banned. So, its activities had already been banned, and it had faced closure. But there've been a number of appeals. Now, this has been going on for a very long time. This isn't something new. But the party, let's not forget, it was the Communist Party of Ukraine was a mass party, and it had representatives in the Ukrainian Rada, the Ukrainian Parliament, and in the last election it stood in back in 2012, it scored 2.5 million votes, so something like 13.5% of the vote. Back in, I think it's at its peak, it was 6.5 million votes. So the problems really started for the Communist Party of Ukraine in 2014 and the Maidan coup. And ironically, the party actually voted for the impeachment of Yanukovych, but they were then subjected to, initially there were attempts to ban it under the pretext that it supported what they call separatists in eastern Ukraine, in the Donbass, and they were charged, and there was court proceedings initiated along those lines. And then in 2015, if you'll remember, the decommunization law came in, which banned the use of communist symbols and imagery, and the party was not allowed to use its own its own party logo. It had to change that in order to continue running. But that was again subject to numerous appeals. So this has been battling through the courts for a very, very long time. Of course, the General Secretary, Petro Simonenko, was banned from standing in elections. And well, he could do so, but not under the party banner and under the party name. The Communist Party's newspaper was also banned. And here we are now in 2022, and just days in fact after the European Union voted in favor of giving Ukraine candidate membership status, to great fanfare. We saw the European Union flag in the Rada, in the Parliament, this mass euphoria, and this kind of congratulatory position adopted by most. Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, was saying, well, Ukraine supports European values. And of course, what's happening in Ukraine at the moment is deemed to be a fight for European values. And of course, those European values were reflected in the ban of the Communist Party. Now, there are people that will argue about that and say, well, it's not very, in line with the European Union. But of course, it is perfectly in line with the European Union. Back in 2019, and they'd already voted on a similar motion previously, but this one in 2019 extended it even further, where this motion, which was a grotesque falsification of history, that very explicitly said that communism and Nazism were two sides of the same coin. They were both, they were both evil ideologies, and of course they said that that street names and statues commemorating either of these ideologies should be torn down. Now, they were very careful, actually. If you're a geek like me and you read over the text of these motions and you listen to the debates, you'll see they were very careful, and they talked about Nazism and not fascism. And there's a very good reason for that, because then the fascist parties can say, well, it doesn't apply to us. And you'll see the situation in Ukraine. The banning of the Communist Party is just the latest in the banning of opposition parties. I think something like 14 parties now have been banned. On May the 14th, Zelensky announced this presidential decree where he banned, I think, 11 parties he banned then, including the opposition platform For Life, which is the biggest opposition party in Ukraine. So when people talk about democracy and the democratic values that they're fighting for, they never seem to mention the oppression of, because they're all left-wing political parties. None of the far-right parties, none of the neo-Nazi parties have been affected by this ban. It's the left-wing parties, it's the communist parties, and we're seeing it's not just the parties. I think a report came out today saying that there's nearly 3,000 people that are under investigation from the intelligence services for high treason. Hopefully in a bit we'll talk about the trial of the Konovich brothers as well, the two Ukrainian youth communist leaders who are currently on trial. Their trial opened last week. We were very fearful, actually, when they were detained on March the 3rd, that they had been executed. Now, this is all of this news. This is shocking stuff, but it's passing by the mainstream media, certainly in Britain. It's not being reported, only by newspapers like the Morning Star. I'm guessing it's a similar situation in the United States too. And all of these people that proclaim to support freedom and democracy, even the what I term the faux left in Britain, these people that have loyally fallen in line with behind the government, behind NATO, and they claim to be supporting progressive forces inside Ukraine, haven't said a word about the Konovich brothers. They haven't said a word about the banning of the Communist Party of Ukraine or any of the other political organizations. They've remained abjectly silent.
Well, maybe let's get into the Konovich brothers then, if you could, but I want to maybe if you could talk about in the context of this ban, the Communist Party of Ukraine, because what I've noticed, and this has been a month-long trend now in Ukraine, that doesn't get any coverage because Ukraine must be painted by the West, by the United States, by the UK, by the European imperialists, the US imperialists, as this country under siege that has absolutely no flaws, no accountability. It is just a victim of Russian aggression. So that has to be the worldwide outlook, at least the message that's sent. But I think there's a stark contrast between who is getting banned, which parties are getting banned, and the ones that aren't in Ukraine, right? You have, and dare I say, you said the difference between Nazism and fascism. I think that's a good way of putting this too, because a lot of far-right nationalist parties, you have the Azov regiment, which is in the National Guard of Ukraine, and the Western media said, "Oh, they're not Nazis. They're were neo-Nazis politically once, and now they're just nationalists inside the army now, and they aren't that many. There's only 800, but yet you see them in all of the Western media photos coming out of Ukraine." But there's a huge contrast here. They're not getting banned, despite the fact that they're overtly political with a political objective to run things. They want to run things in Ukraine, and so could you talk about this in the context of the Kononovich brothers, because it seems like only one side here is getting punished. You don't get any Western media coverage of it either.
I mean, yeah, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head, I think, pretty much. And throughout the Western media, there has been what I think is a very dangerous, downplaying the importance and the influence of the far right and neo Nazis inside Ukraine. And as you said, Azov have been integrated to it, in the Ukrainian armed forces. But now we're seeing what you see now is, of course, they have two things, and they've been given by Western governments and Western media. That's credibility. They've been portrayed as fantastic fighters. Zelensky even brought them into the Greek parliament, and as a fighter of all places, given what they've gone through with Golden Dawn and the fascist rule in Greece as well. But they've also been given arms. They've been armed to the teeth by the West. So the question for me is, of course, once the conflict is over, which it will have to end at some point, what happens to all of those arms that have been flooded into the country and found their way into the arms of the you have a heavily armed fascist paramilitary force that will continue to wreak havoc. Now, the Kononovich brothers are two communist youth leaders, and they were detained on March the 3rd. And they have been initially, we didn't know what was happening to them. They were only pictured for the first time since then, last month. They were pictured handcuffed in the presence of a lawyer. And we know that the intelligence services, the SBU, which I'll talk about them a little bit later in my personal experience with them too. But we know that they had threatened them and said that unless you accept the charges against you, you're going to spend, and which will come with a 10-year prison sentence, then you'll spend the rest of your life behind bars. Now, it is alleged that they've been tortured, and I think that's incredibly likely given the history of this particular intelligence service. And they've been charged with disrupting the state, spying for Russia and Belarus. I mean, it's worth stating that they're ethnic Belarusians as well. And recently this week, the trial opened on last Thursday and Friday. They're banned from attending the courtroom themselves. The prosecutors told the lawyer that there wasn't going to be a hearing, so the lawyer left. And as soon as the lawyer left, the judge opened proceedings. So this is really, this is like Zelensky's show trial. And the brothers have, they appealed. They put an appeal out last week, and they appealed for members of the European Parliament, for elected politicians, and for the Western media to attend that court hearing, just so that they could see exactly what the Ukrainian state and the Ukrainian government is all about. Now, the charges against them are that emerged on Monday were that they were planning to take over one of the districts of Ukraine. And the intelligence services didn't say which district it was. They didn't say when it was. And in way of evidence, they produced very little apart from some social media posts and some speeches that the brothers had given. Now, they have, they're anti-fascists. They've organised anti-fascist resistance in Ukraine. They've been attacked, on the street because of this. And, they have called for a peaceful resolution to the conflict in the Donbass and respect for the Minsk Accords. So, this is what happens to anybody that that doesn't toe the Kiev government's line. So this really is, a show trial. There's many others, by the way, that have also been subjected to these kind of processes. I was in Ukraine in April, and I met many people who told me of similar tales of their neighbors, people fearing the knock on the door in the night and being taken away. And people were talking about a notorious torture dungeon in Mariupol called the Library, which is where people were taken and held in dungeons there, and they were subjected to horrific torture. Many of them disappeared, never to come back. Now, for people that might not know, there's been the establishment of a number of things. There's a hotline for people to call to essentially snitch on their neighbours and report people that have pro-Russian or alleged pro-Russian views. Now that can mean anything, in Ukraine, and it just takes the slightest hint of suspicion, and the authorities will come and take them away. So these are not just leftists and trade unionists, but just ordinary people who are supportive of their right to to speak Russian. That's all it is. I mean, it's as simple as that. Now, I didn't last very long inside Ukraine. I was in Lviv. They threatened to execute me, and they told me that I was a spy. Now, I'm a bona fide journalist, whether they like it or don't like it. I'm the international editor of a daily newspaper in Britain, and I went in there to kind of get to the truth about what's happening, because we were seeing from the Western media in particular, BBC, ITV, Channel 4, The Telegraph, The Times, The Independent in Britain, NBC, CNN in the New York Times in the United States. All of them are deeply embedded with the Ukrainian government. They're based largely in Lviv and Kiev, but they're producing identikit reports that are just repeating the same stories over and over again, and they don't deviate from what is the government line, what is the NATO line, and the US and British government line. So there's no, the truth is very hard to get to the truth. But those that are, like myself, Eva Bartlett, who you'll probably know, and your viewers will know, she's on a government kill list because of her reporting from the Donbass region and eastern Ukraine. And hers, I think, for me, certainly, that her reporting from that region is exemplary. And I think it's some of the best at getting anywhere near the truth about what's happening in that region. I met many people that were telling me similar stories, that were saying that that they were threatened. Ukrainian Azov battalion soldiers had destroyed their homes. One woman showed me that her apartment block destroyed, and she said this was the neo-Nazis. This was Azov, she said. But she also told me that she couldn't leave. If you remember, there were these tales of Mariupol being held under siege. Now, the siege, yes, it was held under siege, but it's not who people think it was held under siege by. It was, they were very clear, and it was, there were. I lost count of the amount of people from the east that told me that it was the Ukrainian forces that held them under siege, held them hostage, and threatened to shoot them if they were leaving. So there's a real effort to contain the truth. In Britain, the Daily Mirror, I believe today, ran a picture on its. I don't know if it was on its front page, but certainly somewhere in the newspaper, where it had shown a picture of an attack in the Donbass and in Donetsk, and claimed it was Russia that did it. Now, it isn't. This is misreporting. This was a Ukrainian shelling. If you probably aware of the news, but a 10-year-old girl was killed. I mean, the video footage is absolutely horrific. Her grandfather said that she was sliced in three. I mean, it's absolutely horrific. These are war crimes, but the war crimes that everybody's talking about, they just want to pin on Russian forces without any investigation. So, you look at the Kremenchuk, for example, the shopping mall that was. Right. I've written something about this because there was the instant recoiling in horror at a shopping mall being attacked, and I understand that from ordinary people in the West and in Britain, of course. But that's the point, that's the point. Right. Is, that it's used to cause that shock value at a time when there's this war weariness, and people are tired of the war in Ukraine. The public support for whatever's happening is waning. So, and this happened, of course, on the eve of the NATO summit as well. I mean, the timing, you have to question the timing, but then again, there's no kind of journalistic investigation into what happened. Now, we know that the photographs show that where were the cars in the car park? There's supposed to be 1,000 people inside, 18 casualties. You'd expect like a slew of of videos on people taking on mobile phones posted on social media showing people fleeing and all this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Those things weren't, they didn't happen. But what we do know is that there was a warehouse that was storing weapons that was just behind the shopping mall, and this was somewhere that close to a train station so that they can move weapons around the country. I know this is happening. I've seen it with my own eyes. The weapons, I've seen the weapons and the military force and the soldiers entering the country on civilian transport networks. That was one of the things that I saw when I went into Lviv. So we know these kind of things are happening. So there's a very clear effort to shut down all opposition. So the Kononovich brothers, of course, are people that are speaking out. They're opposing the government, and it's their constitutional right to do so. It's enshrined in Ukraine's constitution that you're able to criticize the government. Now, there's people will say, well, we're under martial law, so that means we need to close down every TV station, every newspaper, and shut down all opposition parties. Okay, right. Well, let's look at that. Because the majority of these party closures and the majority of the closures of media organizations started way before February the 24th, which is when Western liberals seem to think that what the situation started then.
Yeah.
They don't, they've been silent since, they were not saying anything in 2014, apart from cheering on the Maidan coup and, the neo-Nazis that were behind that. So it's a very bizarre situation that we find ourselves in. So, but yeah, I think the Kononovich brothers should be a warning sign to everybody. There's the famous phrase, isn't there? First they came for the communists, and I think that's most clearly the case with the Communist Party, the banning of the Communist Party, and the potential jailing of the Kononovich brothers.
Yeah, well, the decommunization laws leading into everything that's happened during the Russia-Ukraine conflict, using that as a justification to clamp down on any opposition, should definitely give us pause and reflect on everything you just said. Let's talk about that history then, because I think what this kind of psychological operation that the media has employed, where they show a certain location in Ukraine, generally in East Ukraine, which I found very ironic, but that's where I guess the majority of the fighting is happening. They show an image like the shopping mall, right? And they say smoke is coming on, and a missile reports from the Ukrainian government. All you have, right? The main source for all Western media has been the Ukrainian government, because that's their guy, that's their government. But what I think it serves to do is it serves to reinforce this notion that, as you said, this whole thing started February 24th, when in fact you've been covering and we've been covering here that this did not start in February 24th, 2022, that this goes back to the Maidan coup. It goes back to 2014. Could you speak about what's been happening since 2014? Because it's almost unbelievable. It almost for a lot of people, it almost feels like there's no context, but we know that Ukraine's government has been doing this kind of shelling. If there's any suspicion about who's doing shelling in Eastern Ukraine, it should be the Ukrainian government, because they've been doing it since 2014. Could you talk about what that's been like, why they're doing it? Like, why has there been a conflict inside of Ukraine internally since 2014? Could you speak to that a bit?
Well, I think where this started, if you go back to 2014, was this dispute over where Ukraine's future lay. Now, the Maidan coup kicked off because the president at the time backed out of a deal which would have closer integrated Ukraine with the European Union, politically and economically. So it would have opened up the Ukrainian market to the European Union through a series of free trade and other kind of agreements, and it would have also meant that Ukraine would have signed up to military agreements and military arrangements. Now, of course, that was rejected by with closer ties with Russia, saw as as an alternative, which, given Ukraine's history and given its its geopolitical position, is quite normal. Now, they wanted relations with both sides, which I think would have been a very reasonable position. Now, of course, this was not something that the United States, because they're always lurking in the background of everything, was prepared to accept. So there was this huge protest movement, and it was led by the far right, which ousted the democratically elected president in a violent coup. I mean, we're talking parliament buildings that were firebombed, and mass killings, 14,000 people, because there was an uprising in the east against that opposed the this deal and the ousting of the government there. And of course, that was violently put down. And these are Russian speakers predominantly in the east, and 14,000 people have died since 2014, predominantly Russian speakers, as the Ukrainian armed forces mobilized against them. I mean, this was pretty brutal. I mean, before February the 24th, people would have spoken quite openly about the war crimes that were committed by the Ukrainian forces, the assassinations that were taking place, the torture, the rape of people in those regions. But of course, that now is conveniently forgotten. Now, that conflict was, there was a fragile ceasefire which ended in two accords, the Minsk 1 and Minsk 2, the provisions of which would are actually a road to peace. They would have provided a road to peace, and this would have meant that the people in the Donetsk and Lugansk would have had autonomy within Ukraine. They'd have stayed within Ukraine. They'd have had autonomy. They'd have had more rights rights to speak Russian. But of course, this was never implemented. And at the same time, the United States and NATO was creeping, its eastward expansion, absorbing more and more countries, putting more and more countries into its orbit. And of course, the prize for them was Ukraine, and this is what they wanted, to bring Ukraine into NATO, and that would have meant that NATO would have been right on Russia's doorstep. Now, going back to November or December, Russia started raising its legitimate security concerns, and said that that it wanted some assurances from NATO and from the United States, but these were outright rejected. The United States, Lloyd Austin, I think it was, simply said, "I'm not even looking at them," and refused to even consider them. So, and instead, we saw a huge buildup of military forces. I think something like 135,000 were now approaching Russia's borders, and then again the military exercises across the border states as well. So this was something, of course, that Russia was rightly concerned about. But we've had 8 years of war, 8 years of the killing of Russian speakers that have been waged by fascist forces. Now, let's not forget things that have happened, like the Odessa Trade Union House massacre. More than 100 people were burnt to their death in that building, whilst fascist forces outside were singing the Ukrainian national anthem. And I always sort of draw this analogy of, if you remember the little girl who was singing in the in the underground sometime in February or March, and then footage of this went viral, and then she performed the national anthem on the stage in front of thousands of people. And this was a sharp contrast to actually the national anthem being sung while people were being burnt alive. So we had all of these kind of atrocities that were being committed. The government tries to sort of play down the prevalence of neo-Nazism in Ukraine, but it was only a few years ago that the Prime Minister was the guest speaker at a neo-Nazi music festival, just weeks after he'd been elected in 2019. Now, if they're not a significant force, why would you go and address one of their concerts? He was standing on stage with neo-Nazi insignia in the background. The government has funded youth holiday clubs for young people led by Nazis. I mean, this is, the reality of the situation is very different from, I think, people's understanding and how it's being portrayed in the West as this bastion of liberalism and democracy. It certainly isn't anything of the sort. This is, this is a country that's been at war with its own people, that has massacred its own people, and that has been committing a genocide against Russian speakers in the East. Now, I think that Russia has every right to be concerned over that. And like I said earlier, there was a road to peace and a road to war, and NATO, the United States, Britain and the European Union chose the latter. They chose the road to war. They could have prevented this. They could have stuck by the Minsk agreements, and still now here we are in July 2022, and their answer still is to flood Ukraine with more weapons. We're seeing, I think the United States, what was it, 40 billion?
40 billion, and then I think it was something like 59 billion in a matter of 4 weeks or something like that.
I mean, this is astonishing. And we've seen a similar kind of thing in Britain, not on the same level, but in the same and in other European countries. We've seen that Germany now, a more militarized Germany, and economies across the Eurozone are being trashed as a result of this as well. You all know more about the United States, obviously, but I know inflation's running high, that job losses are running high.
Let's actually pivot there, because first, I just want to say, people that have come into the stream, please do like it. Please do subscribe to the channel. Like the stream, though. It helps boost the algorithm. But I wanted to ask you about the UK situation, because in the United States, I feel like since the Russia-Ukraine, the special military operation Ukraine that Russia launched officially February 24th, there has been a lot of chaos that has built up and crisis that has built up in the NATO countries, United States, EU, etc. Could you speak to the UK situation right now? Because it's quite fraught. There's a lot of resignations happening in key posts. In the United States, there's a crisis of legitimacy. The Biden administration is getting attacked by the most loyalist celebrities at this point. I mean, his public opinion rating is way down. And now there's all these calls for Boris Johnson to resign. So is there any connection between Russia's special military operation and the way that the UK has handled this and the crisis that's happening with the government? And could you just speak to that crisis in general? Because I'm very curious about what's going on.
Yeah, I was just going to briefly check, because since we've been on air, I know that that there's been Boris Johnson has been met by a group of senior cabinet ministers at Downing Street, and they're calling for him to resign. This includes the newly appointed Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi, who only was appointed last night after he threatened to resign. But he's been met by people like Grant Shapps and Brandon Lewis, who are Johnson loyalists, even the new education secretary, and they're encouraging him to resign. The Backbench 1922 committee are meeting, I believe, later this evening. So there's every possibility that there could be a confidence vote on Johnson's leadership again as soon as Monday. Now, his approval ratings in Britain are as low as something like 24%. Record numbers of resignations for any British Prime Minister in history. So he's, to all intents and purposes, Johnson's a sitting duck, and it's the knives are out, and I don't think he'll be around for much longer. Ironically, he's used the situation in Ukraine as a reason for him not to be sacked as prime minister, and he's saying that his leadership is necessary. As you'll know, that Johnson really has kind of led the charge in Europe for supporting more arms to Ukraine and more military aid, and has encouraged other European Union countries and other European countries to follow suit. He's really, he is the US mouthpiece in Europe. Let's not pretend that Britain has an independent foreign policy. It hasn't done for decades, really. So, but Johnson's in very, very big trouble now. The economy has recorded its highest inflation levels for decades, 11%. I think it's the highest for 40 for 40 years. And we have a summer of strike action. You'll probably know that the rail workers took strike action last week. It was the biggest national strike that they've held for decades. We're talking about health workers coming out on strike. Even doctors are now talking about walking out because people are seeing that their living conditions are being ameliorated. Energy prices are rocketing. There's even talk of energy rationing in the winter, people being told to turn off their energy. We're seeing this already in Germany, where they're limiting hot water, and I think the vice chancellor is showering less frequently, which I'm sure will be a great source of pleasure for his colleagues. But it shows the seriousness of the situation. I think Germany's posted its record inflation levels since the 1980s. France, Spain, Italy. So we're seeing this, and people are reacting against that, because at the same time this is happening, they're all their military spending is increasing. Now, this is partly to meet NATO's target of 2% of GDP, but Johnson's gone even further and said he wants it at 2.5% of GDP, and perhaps others are saying that it should be even higher. So. But on the other hand, they're using the energy crisis as an excuse for what's happening, as an excuse for the spiraling inflation, as an excuse for wage restraint and cuts to people's living standards. When in reality, this happened. This was starting to happen way before February. So this is to do with economic mismanagement, certainly in Britain, and the privatisation of key sectors, including the public utilities. And of course, that leads to increasing prices, because whilst the general public are feeling the pinch, the bosses of these organisations aren't. The bosses of the energy companies aren't feeling the pinch. The bosses of the privatised rail network, they're not feeling the pinch. So, I mean, really, this they don't care about trashing our living standards or the economies. This is about propping up the military-industrial complex. Now, you can look back. I forget which month it was. April or May, where the Pentagon invited the 8 largest arms companies in for, to talk to them about producing more weapons and producing more arms. We've had similar today in the House of Commons, where Johnson was grilled over shortages or the British Army facing a shortage of weapons. NLAWs and other weapons are being sent over to Ukraine, and they're not being replaced. So there's factories and warehouses in Belfast, in the north of Ireland, which are now being pressured to start producing more, because the arms of the standing army in Britain are being depleted too. So there's some huge problems. I think Johnson is toast. Personally, I don't think he's going to be around. I'd be very surprised if he lasts the weekend out. But this is politics. Anything can happen, and Boris Johnson is proving to be incredibly stubborn. And he even said today, no, he's fighting on, and there won't be an election until 2024. But we'll see what happens.
Yes, indeed, we will. We will. I mean, what it feels like, and maybe we can end here on your final comments. It feels like that as this, I mean, what's progressed, it seems like, in Ukraine is that Russia has been successful in its special military operation. There is no end game for the US and NATO. There is no end game here, because the only end game is some kind of negotiated settlement. And
Sure.
the weapons contractors, they don't want that. The US NATO countries, they don't want that. They just expanded NATO. They have Sweden, Finland now in the club, and they're like, no, we want to milk this baby for all it's worth. But it also seems like now Wall Street, the big investors down, Downing Street, they're talking about they're talking about facilitating a recession, so
Yeah.
an economic crisis. So it feels like, as the realization that the Ukraine situation doesn't have an end game and is causing a lot of problems that you mentioned, and that there's going to be a recession on the way, it feels like some of the political instability is about trying to put ducks in a row to manage it in some way, in any way possible, because right now there's no political management over it other than staying the course and continuing in the same direction. It seems like that the panic it's all self-inflicted, of course, but it's there. And so I don't know if you have any final comments about the situation, and then anything you'd like to, end with.
I think you've raised an important point, and I think that's certainly when I was in Ukraine, it was incredibly clear to any kind of serious analyst and any serious observer that Ukraine wasn't winning the war. We were constantly being told through the mainstream British media, certainly, and I know the United States media were, taking a similar line, that plucky Ukraine was defeating the brutal Russian invaders. And we heard these fabulous tales about the craziest one, the woman who brought down a drone with a jar of pickled cucumbers, and we were told that Russia, it wasn't able to take Kiev, even though taking Kiev was never one of Russia's, the aims of Russia's operation. It was very clear, and it was very clear. I got criticised for saying this in April, that it was very clear that Russia was meeting all of its objectives. Now, a lot of the talk was, if you remember, the French President Emmanuel Macron was saying we need to resolve this, but so that Vladimir Putin can save face, and that that we don't embarrass him. But that he has a way out. Now, I think the inverse of that is actually the case, because this is a NATO proxy war. I think we're all on board with that. I don't think that's being denied anymore. But Russia is winning. It's achieving all its objectives. It's the Western powers that are losing. They might think that they're strengthened, but in fact, the NATO conference, and I think exposed some real divisions and differences, particularly over Finland and Sweden's bid to join, and how that's triggered this row with Turkey, but also inside the European Union as well. We had Hungary and other countries expressing disquiet about Ukraine's membership of the European Union. So it showed a weakness and disunity. And I think now, these crises, in one way, are being manufactured. I think the economic crisis across the Eurozone partly is targeted at the German economy. And I think that there's been a willingness to sacrifice the German economy. Of course, Germany has been traditionally been the economic powerhouse of Europe under Angela Merkel, the former chancellor before Olaf Scholz. Merkel had good relations with Putin, and the German economy relies heavily, as we know, on German gas. So I think that there's been a deliberate attempt to trash the the German economy in a way to loosen any of those ties with Russia and the Russian economy, but also to strengthen them for this US hegemony in the region. I think we shouldn't also forget that this, what the war is. And it's not just this is a NATO proxy war. This is about the defense of a unipolar world. So the target isn't just Russia. This is about weakening Russia, and I think that's part of the reason that there's no peace talks or peace agreement, and that we're being driven further away from that, because they want to stretch and weaken Russia. But behind Russia lies China, and I think that's the real target of the United States. And I guess that's a whole nother show, right? To talk. I think, I think this is what's at stake here now. Again, in the United States, you have the midterm elections coming up, and Biden's predicted to do terribly in those, as far as
if he runs. I mean, at this point, it's looking like if he runs.
Yeah, I mean, he's in serious trouble. So I think there's that's partly driving what we're seeing now, and this refusal to sign or refusal to even enter any kind of peaceful negotiations. As you said earlier on, Danny, it has to end. And it will end with people sitting around the table signing a piece of paper, and there seems to be a willingness particularly from the Western countries and NATO to prolong it, and to try and seek advantage in this is how imperialism works.
No, and if you're a Marxist too, you understand everything changes. The ruling class doesn't always understand that, but we understand that things can't remain the same. But this was a great conversation, Steve. Thanks so much for coming on. Stick around, everyone. I am going to be on and cover a few more stories, so do stick around. But yeah, Steve, where can people find you? We'll have to have you on again sometime to cover more of the things that we spoke about today. But where can people find you?
They can find me on Twitter, which is at Sweeney Steve. That's SWEENEYSTEVE. They can follow my work on by following the Morning Star. We're on across all social media platforms. I also write for Al Mayadeen as well, so you can follow me, follow my work there. Pretty soon, I'll be setting up my own YouTube channel as well. So I'll keep
Great.
Yeah, I'm going to get get all that kind of stuff set up soon, so people will be able to follow me on there very soon. But yeah,
awesome.
Thank you so much for
having me on. Yeah, of course. I put the links in the chat to your Twitter, to Morning Star. So definitely keep following Steve. Thanks so much again, Steve. We'll have to talk again soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. All right. So that was a great conversation today. Keep sticking around, though. Keep liking the stream. There's a bit of a discrepancy. All right. So let's see. Oh, actually, no, there's more. It says now there's more likes than viewers. So thanks so much for boosting this stream. Keep subscribing to the channel, of course. And the best way, what am I? I am $59, $60 per month short of my annual goal on Patreon to help sustain this channel and all of my work, my columns, streams, all of the work I do here, producing this channel, right? Getting equipment. Unfortunately, I need to do some repairs. So please do support this work at patreon.com/Danny Haiphong. It is very much appreciated, and it helps continue all of this work. That was a really good conversation with Steve Sweeney, journalist, editor over at the Morning Star. Great publication. We'll have to have him on again soon. I wanted to transition now, though, so keep liking the stream, subscribing, all of that good stuff. I want to transition to something else now. So I've been noticing, Joe Rogan came out in support of Ron DeSantis in 2024. I've been noticing that Ron DeSantis has been getting some pretty positive coverage of late. And I wanted to talk about this a bit because what it feels like is happening, and then I saw an article, I forget where, was it Politico? I saw an article stating, I didn't save that article, stating that Gavin Newsom and Ron DeSantis are kind of hedging and negotiating toward possibly running in 2024 should Biden, of course, for Newsom, this would be the case. If Biden were to run again, I doubt you'd see Gavin Newsom try to primary him, try to defeat Joe Biden in a primary. But nonetheless, Joe Biden is in a lot of trouble right now, as we just stated. Economic crisis of legitimacy, politically fueled by inflation, fueled by the fact that the Russia-Ukraine conflict is endless, fueled by the fact that there are mass shootings happening all of the time. There's just a lot of instability. And then, of course, the pandemic, which hasn't ended. And people are very frustrated about how that has gone on, how it's affected their life. So there's a lot of frustration right now, and Biden's polling numbers are way down. We're talking about 7 out of 10 Americans driven by Democratic Party voters who don't want to see Joe Biden run in 2024. And then you had Deborah Messing and these celebrities, right, come out within the last 24 hours saying how disappointed they were in Joe Biden for not doing anything, right, about Roe v. Wade. And publicly saying they had a private conversation with the White House, which we should all take pause and say, well, why is Joe Biden, the administration, talking to these wealthy celebrities while there's crises afoot? Well, I think that just speaks to how corrupted and how corporate controlled the Democratic Party is. But the point is that even Democratic Party loyalists seem to be turning on Joe Biden. And there's a lot of chatter about Joe Biden's legitimacy. I see it in the mainstream press now over the last couple of days. But to even think about Ron DeSantis, right? I'm not going to put a hierarchy on these capitalist politicians. Believe me, I don't support any of them. I am against the duopoly. We need to dump the duopoly. Holy crap. The chat is spammed out today. Must be because we're talking about Ukraine. So, but back to DeSantis, I mean, we're talking about a duopoly where there are no redeeming qualities. There are no leaders. There are no politicians that we should be saying, oh, yes, let's support them over X, right? That's not what I'm arguing here. But what I'm arguing is that it's quite strange, right, for anybody. I don't care who you are, but especially those on the left, to hedge our bets on someone like Ron DeSantis, because I get it. I see it. I see the kind of scam here that Ron DeSantis is some kind of alternative figure, right? That he speaks out against lockdowns and vaccines or whatever is COVID, right? Florida has been open, I think, this whole time. I was there for a week visiting a friend, and I can tell you it was wide open, and that was not late in the pandemic, right? So he's been a champion of, right, just no COVID measures whatsoever. And so I get it that has an alternative figure to it because there's all this debate about COVID restrictions. But what I don't get is not understanding the character of Ron DeSantis himself, his class character. And it's not hard to see who Ron DeSantis really is when you see who backs him. So Ron DeSantis is a billionaire-backed, corporate-owned politician. He is a wholly owned political subsidiary of Capital. So let's look at this story here. Ron DeSantis has 42 billionaire donors, and here are the most notable. All right, this is in USA Today's Tallahassee Democrat. So it says Florida analysis found dozens of billionaires and billionaire family members with a net worth of $275 billion donating to DeSantis's re-election effort. A level of billionaire support one expert called extraordinary. So he goes above and beyond, sure, but above and beyond for the ruling class. So even that kind of comment in this mainstream periodical should tell the tale. So let's look at by the numbers, right? So here are some extra links, but here are some of the notable billionaires. So you have Ken Griffin, who has a net worth of $26 billion. He is a contributor of $5 million to DeSantis's reelection effort for governor. And he's a CEO of Citadel, which is a Chicago hedge fund and highly active in conservative politics. All right. So you have Julia Koch. She is the widow of the late, or Koch. Okay. Julia Koch. She is the widow of David Koch, the famous for supporting conservative causes, and is the wealthiest DeSantis donor. According to Forbes, Koch and her family are worth $62.2 million. The Kansas resident inherited a 42% stake in Koch Industries with her 3 children. So he's a Koch-funded politician. He's a Koch-funded. He is no different. He is just GOP, right? This isn't some kind of Trump 2.0. And then we found out that Trump was actually supported by mega capitalist forces, as well as all GOP politicians are. They did eventually pour their money into him. Even if there was a huge exodus of mainstream national security state Republicans from the Republican Party. You have Fancelli, Julie Jenkins Fancelli, who is one of 7 children of Publix founder George Jenkins. Forbes says the Jenkins family was worth $8.8 billion in 2020, who has homes in Italy, Lakeland, Longboat Key, and she was a key donor to the rally organized on January 6, 2021. So that's who supports this guy. So you have real estate holding Edward Bartello, D. Bartello Jr. He has owned the NFL's San Francisco 49ers, but now his sister has taken control of the team. After D. Bartolo pled guilty to being asked for a bribe by the former governor of Louisiana over a riverboat gambling license and failing to report it. So he was pardoned by Trump. So the DeVos family, oh great. The DeVos family donated to DeSantis, including Donald Trump's education secretary, Betsy DeVos. They are related to Amway co-founder Richard DeVos, who was worth an estimated $5.4 billion in 2018 when he dies. They currently own the Orlando Magic. So, I mean, there you go. So, DeSantis is a free marketeer. He's someone who decries any kind of government regulation. He's anti-social welfare, right? Anti-state, anti-government, at least when it comes to when government is supposed to serve the people. But he's very pro-government. So he's had this identity of, well, against the government measures around COVID. But let me show you what he is pro-government over. So don't get it twisted, guys. He is not anti-government, all right? And this is something that some have brought up. And so I wanted to share with you what DeSantis has recently done, which indicates that he is very pro-government when it comes to protesting. Governor DeSantis signs a law making picketing, protesting outside of a person's home illegal. In a statement, the Florida governor said unruly mobs in front of homes of Supreme Court justices is inappropriate. So this is a guy who signed into law HB 1571 to make protesting outside of a person's home illegal, starting with a warning and then an arrest if the person does not peaceably disperse. The offense will be classified as a second-degree misdemeanor. It came shortly after the Roe v. Wade ruling. So this is someone, Mr. DeSantis, and I'm not even going to keep this up. Mr. DeSantis is all about outlawing protest when it's around issues he opposes, right? I think he took the same line around the Black Lives Matter anti-police brutality protests. So that seems very heavy-handed government to me, because I thought the right to protest was protected under freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, right? As long as you're not committing a crime while protesting, right? I thought that was protected. But this guy literally criminalized protesting. So if we're on the left, we have to be really careful here. We have to be really, really careful, okay? This guy is not worth supporting. Look, the Democratic Party is abhorrent. There's nothing better on that side of the aisle either. But to think that a Koch brothers, a Koch family, hedge fund backed politician like DeSantis is the solution, I think would demonstrate a failure to be nice about it, a failure of imagination. Because if we are truly anti-duopoly, then we can't support someone like this. I don't care if he's for liberty and freedom and if he agrees with some position. I mean, I haven't seen a position that I agree with them on, right? I don't believe that we should just be not doing anything about COVID. Do I believe that the government handles this correctly? No, I don't agree to think that the U.S. government is correctly handling the pandemic. Do I believe we should have no restrictions around COVID? No, I don't think that that's right either. I think we have to have a public health system that manages public health emergencies like pandemics. I don't think that should be controversial. But people like DeSantis, what they do is they ride on the backs of people's discontent and exploit them for political gain, just like all bourgeois ruling class politicians of the United States' ruling class. That's what they do. They're there to try to exploit people, just like celebrities exploit people's need for some kind of escape, for some kind of gratification. These politicians are out here not to serve us, not to do what we want them to do, not to do what we need them to do, but to exploit us politically so that those who exploit us economically are able to maintain their power. That's what Ron DeSantis is doing in his own way. And that's what Joe Biden does as U.S. president. So we need to have that analysis. That's the full analysis, okay? The full analysis is that these capitalist politicians serve capitalists, and the U.S. is in such a crisis that they're willing to entertain the prospect of these far-right politicians as some kind of amelioration of the crisis. That's why you have all these billionaires supporting them. They're looking to cash in, right? And cash in ways that possibly Biden can't provide for them. But Joe Biden has been a boon for the capitalist class. This inflation crisis is literally employers, Wall Street, literally the ruling class, the economic elites, raising the prices to run away with your money and your wealth as we deal with a nexus of crises, from the Ukraine situation to mass shootings to the fact that this pandemic is with us and is probably permanently with us, even if it's not at a pandemic level. But the fact that this pandemic is still a pandemic level and it's not going away, and there's a lot of discontent about it. These capitalists are taking advantage of all of that, right? Because they facilitated a crisis all the way back in 2019 without anybody knowing it. And then in 2020, we learned during the pandemic that, well, there was an economic crisis, and you saw this massive upward transfer of wealth and massive unemployment because of the pandemic restrictions. And that hasn't really let up in terms of people's livelihoods. People are struggling hard. It'll be really interesting to see the poverty numbers, all of that, all these indicators as we move forward. But the point is that DeSantis, Biden, Gavin Newsom, I didn't even get into Gavin Newsom because that guy is so abhorrent. I don't even want to cover him, but maybe one day, another episode. But the point is that DeSantis here is the focus, and DeSantis here is not the solution. So we shouldn't treat him like one. And we have to have, I think, a more nuanced analysis. He is not, just like Trump wasn't for us. Trump was just the outcome, a byproduct of a crisis of legitimacy. Donald Trump didn't serve working people. He certainly didn't serve even the foreign policy interests that we may have had in some of his campaign sloganeering, right? He was anti-worker and he was pro-war in a lot of ways. Relations with Russia actually got worse under his administration, and we can debate about, well, was that Trump or was that the neocon, neoliberal establishment? Well, I think it was a combination of both. Of course, there was heavy-handed pressure, but really, if Donald Trump is running as president, and we don't trust presidents on the left, usually presidential candidates, to keep their promises within a system that is predicated on an endless war and austerity, then should we have trusted Donald Trump either? Probably not. So we have to get ourselves out of this duopoly scam. It is a scam. It is not for us. It is not for the ordinary people. It's not for the oppressed people. It's not for working class people. We are the only ones who will save us. We're the only ones who will liberate this United States of America, right, as it is called, from this seemingly a worsening crisis and ever more violent and exploitative system of capitalism and imperialism that we live under. That's who will do it. Our efforts, our organizing, and our movement to create a transition, to create a transitional moment, a confrontation, and a revolutionary moment so that we can have a socialist government. That is what we need. A government that meets the needs of the people, does not serve for-profit entities, does not serve the interests of profit. We need a government that serves the needs of the people, and we need to be the ones governing it. That's it. We don't need bourgeoisie to govern us. We don't need that. The bourgeoisie will never govern us for our interests. They won't even give concessions anymore. Not because it's a matter of their wants or whatever. It's because there are laws to this system, and the laws of capitalism says that there will be a general crisis and that there will be a movement toward recession. There will be, any opportunity that can be taken to monopolize, to cut costs, to increase the rate of exploitation. They're going to be taken. So that's why everything is being taken from us. So we have to understand that. And the last thing I want to talk about, I just want to react quickly to the July 4th, right? Shooting / Jayland Walker, right? I definitely need to get back on here with Margaret, because she wrote an article about Jalen Walker. And I definitely want to get back on with her. We'll definitely do that soon this month, hopefully on the earlier side. But, there was a shooting at Highland Park. White suburban kid, supposedly, quote unquote, right? He was, he killed 6 people at Highland Park, Illinois. He was peacefully apprehended. And around the same time, we had Jalen Walker. I believe he was a 25-year-old black man who was delivering food. There was a traffic violation. I forget what the violation was, but he was killed and brutally. The police shot at him around 90 times. I believe 60 bullets hit his body, completely maimed him. I mean, that's a massacre. That is an act of torture, what they did to him, right? Just the most brutal kind of scenario you could think of happened to him. It was a lynching. It was a police-sponsored, police-facilitated lynching. So it's really interesting to see the reactions, first in how the police treated Jalen Walker versus the shooter. The shooter ended up being peacefully apprehended, taken into custody. Jalen Walker, despite the fact that he killed people. Of course, white suburban kid with a gun. Jalen Walker, no gun, trying to do his job, commits a traffic infraction, gets shot 60 times, right? So I think we can see how racism plays a role in the maintenance of capitalism here, because you have a working class person being brutalized, lynched, working class black person lynched in Akron, Ohio, Jalen Walker, while you have a mass shooter terrorizing the public, peacefully apprehended. We've seen this before. Dylan Roof, right? This isn't the first time, and it certainly won't be the last. But we have to, I think, be aware that racism in the is the key, one of the key, if not the key, tool of social control to reinforce and reproduce capitalism and exploitation. We cannot forget that. And we have to raise it, because right now these issues are getting separated from each other. You have people talking about mass shootings, arguably way more than they talk about what happens to black people like Jalen Walker. But you have people talking about mass shootings as if they're just this separate issue. I said that, the United States is at war with itself because it's at war with the world. I said that on Twitter. I would add that the United States has always been at war with itself. Always been at war with itself. The United States has brutalized, kills a black person every single day via the police. The police kill around 200 plus black people every single year. One every 28, every 36 hours, somewhere around there. That's never talked about. But the mass shootings, right? Buffalo, Uvalde, Highland Park, they get a lot of coverage because the gun control issue can be manipulated to serve the interests of capital. Well, the killing of black people, you really can't do that, because this topic of racism is so fraught. It is something that has the potential to instigate rebellion. And we saw that in 2020, saw that in 2014. We saw that throughout the 1960s. You saw that during the Rodney King Rebellion in the 90s. You see it over and over again and throughout history. And then you also see, of course, the movements that arise for black liberation, for socialism, for both. You see that arise. That's what the ruling class is scared of. They're not scared of the gun control debate. There's nothing about the gun control debate that scares them. Capital will win regardless. It's just about which interests within capital, whether it's the weapons manufacturers versus those who want to see a little bit more of a stable society so they can exploit us better, right? So a little bit more regulation. Just, stop killing, stop creating these public relations crises. That's all our lives are worth, right? This is just a stain on the fabric to them of the fabric of capitalism. It's not about our lives. It's not about our livelihoods. It's not about our well-being, right? The mass shootings. It's about, well, one side wants better public relations. The other side wants endless profits for weapons manufacturers. So the gun control debate doesn't threaten capital. It doesn't. What threatens capital is talking about why was Jayland Walker killed and why was he killed the way he was? What is the function of the police? Right? I had Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz on here and she talked about the early stages of the police, right? Slave patrols, militias, right? Armed militias, settler militias meant to wipe away, clear away indigenous people from their land, exterminate them. Slave patrols meant to catch rebelling slaves who ran away from their enslavement. That's the roots of policing. And that's why Jayland Walker's happen a lot, right? Amadou Diallo, right? Remember him? He was killed in a very similar way, just outside of his home, put up his wallet, and they put, I don't know, I forget how many bullets it was, but it was a lot. I don't know if it was 60, but it was a lot. So there you have it, right? This is something that we have to talk about. We have to raise it because one thing I notice is that it seems like a lot of the outrage and the attention is on the mass shootings. And look, I don't like mass shootings. I don't. The United States has had 300 in the last year. It's absolutely incredible what's happening. There is a decay of this system that's happening that is not being talked about. So yes, we should talk about it, but we should also give attention to the fact that the police are the primary perpetrators of lynching in the United States. They kill 1,000 people per year. Nearly a quarter of them are Black people. More of those people of color, indigenous people. We need to talk about that. And then, of course, many white people get ensnared by police killings. It's not being talked about as much anymore. You have Joe Biden talking about funding police more around mass shootings, funding police more around January 6th, funding police more around police reform for police brutality, right? That's the only discourse that's happening around this politically. And we've seen the Black Lives Matter uprising be tempered by the Democratic Party. It has. It's time to, really fess up and acknowledge that. Now, there are a lot of protests happening in Akron, Ohio, right? People are angry. And people get angry every time this happens in the locality. And so I'm not saying that everyone is being just taken by the Democratic Party. But we saw the leadership. We at Black Agenda Report, we're seeing it. We were analyzing it. We were braising it when it was not popular. Hey, look at what the Black Lives Matter Network is doing. Look at what people like, what was his name? The Blue Vest. DeRay McKesson, right? Privatizer extraordinaire. Working with TF, Teach for America, right? Going to the Aspen Institute, all of this stuff. Look at what these folks are doing. And then we found out that tens of millions of dollars have been siphoned by certain organizations. They received big donations from Google and other institutions. And then they also took a lot of people's donations in 2020 and ran away with it. Nowhere to be found. No institutions, no organization, no infrastructure for people to plug into so they can actually build a strong organization that can get us to that confrontation, right? Get us to that moment of confidence that people have in standing up for what they want and what they need and their demands. No, we didn't get that. And so there's a huge political vacuum that has been engendered by that. And it has led to the fact that mass shootings, because a lot more liberals and a lot more people on you could say the bourgeois political side of the aisle will use it and exploit it for their own benefit, that gets talked about. That will get talked about. That will get a lot of press coverage. But Jalen Walker, before he was trending on Twitter, he got barely any attention for what was happening to him. And it was only right that the body cam footage and the news came out about how many bullets that he started to get any media coverage at all. But of course, the mass shootings also help generate fear, right? There's no solutions proposed. There's no public action posed, right? We're not being told, hey, maybe we need to build better community. Maybe we need resources poured into that. Maybe we need resources poured in to people. Maybe we need to build the rudiments of a stable society, a harmonious society. But you'd have to address the exploitation part first and the war part, the endless war, the violence, right? If you have institutions like the police and the war machine, the Pentagon, and it's in the other war-making apparatus in the U.S., if you have them killing and maiming and slaughtering and massacring people abroad, starving them to death through sanctions, arming fundamentalist groups, Contras, jihadists to get their job done, well, arming neo-Nazis and fascists to meet foreign policy objectives, well, then what stops people from raging their own crusade, right? This is a country, after all, built on guns and built on a crusade of genocide, colonialism, slavery, capitalism, right? Theft. It's built on that. So what stops people from doing that unless we pour resources into stopping that? And they don't want to have that conversation. The ruling class doesn't want to have that conversation, so we don't have it. And we see the result. Mass shooting after mass shooting after mass shooting after mass shooting after mass shooting. And then you have the police killing after police killing after police killing. But when is enough is enough? When is enough, right? So that's the question we have to ask. What will compel us into some kind of real public action, real social movement, real independent political activity? I think many of you here that are on this stream are there and trying to figure it out with me. So with that said, though, everyone, continue to like this stream, continue to subscribe to the channel, continue to hit the notifications bell so you're notified. And I am $60 away now from my goal. Unfortunately, it was a tough month on Patreon. People are dealing with an inflation crisis. They're dealing with so much threats to their livelihood. So, I met my goal and then immediately was unfortunately 60. Now I'm $60 away from it again. So please help sustain this work at patreon.com/Danny Haiphong. You can also go to Substack, works just as well. All of those links are in the description. So thanks so much for tuning in. I can take some questions though. I don't see any questions, super chats, or anything like that. But I can take some questions. I got about 10 minutes or so before I am going to run. So if you have any questions, let me know. Put them at the bottom of the chat. So as you know, my background is a little different now. I'm back in New York City. I can tell you, I hate July 4th more than anything now. I mean, I already dislike July 4th. I'm not some, I don't thump my, I don't wave the American flag and say I got pride in that thing. So I never really liked July 4th, but there were fireworks in my neighborhood till 5:30 a.m. I kid you not. I'm like, damn, is that even fun anymore? Like, this is wild. I mean, my dog was going insane because most animals don't like to feel like they're being shot at, right? So, sorry, I gotta this bot shit. Damn. These bots are crazy. So, Frontline reporters worth following, said Lewis. Well, I mean, Steve is worth following. That's a good question, though. I mean, depends on what Frontline you're asking for. There's a woman, man, now I can't remember her name. There's a woman who was in Ecuador recently. So yeah, I mean, I think Camila Escalante, she's definitely on the front lines in Latin America. Definitely follow her and follow Casacho News. But that's a good question. So, it depends on what you're looking for, Oh, for Ukraine. So, Lewis, that's a good question. It's great that Steve was there recently. A lot of the coverage I'm told to get is on Telegram, but to be honest, I haven't been able to follow it that much because I've been doing some other things, covering some other issues. So I'd have to get back to you on that. But please. Oh, actually, there is a guy who, man, what is his name? See, this is the problem. I haven't been able to scour the YouTube, but there is someone who's in East Ukraine. I forget his name now. So, I can't remember his name. Anyway, sorry about that. Patrick Lancaster. Yeah, there you go. Patrick, thank you, Big Tia. Woof. All right. Patrick Lancaster. That is his name. So, Lewis, I would follow him. Thank you so much. A lot of people came and saved the day there. So, thanks for that question. Let's see. There's some other questions here. What you got to stop those ads for armed forces. They don't fit your narrative. Thanks. Question. Okay, hold on. Okay, here we go. Question from Where. Hi, Where. Do you think the recent spate of shootings will accelerate any significant changes regarding gun reform, or do you think it'll fall by the wayside as it often does? Nah, no significant changes. I mean, the weapons manufacturers are so strong. I mean, they ride the backs of the military industrial complex. So they have a huge market, right? There's a huge market for the guns. They're not the same contractors, of course, but these weapons producers have, and we know that a lot of gun producers actually do produce the weapons that are used in conflicts like Ukraine. So they have a lot of power and weight, and I don't see anything significant changing with them. So no significant reform. Do I think any reform? Could I say any reform is going to happen? Maybe. But I don't see why that would take precedent right now over the other issues that the Biden administration is having. I do think that this is going to just be held in the realm of debate. And I think the issue is a little too valuable as a distraction to actually put any kind of resolution on. Similar to Roe v. Wade, the Democrats take that stance, right? They didn't want to legislate it. They didn't want it to go away. They didn't want to make it an issue that they had to be held accountable over. They wanted it kept in the Supreme Court, and they did everything they can to make it so fragile in the Supreme Court. And now they're hopeful that they can use the issue to propel them in this crisis of legitimacy, right, to some kind of political success. It's a dumb calculation. It's a downright stupid. It's not going to work, but that's the calculation. Nonetheless, that's all that they have to offer. So Albert says, what do you think of the boomerang effect of regime change policy for Russia? I mean, the West is in trouble. NATO countries are in trouble. It seems like the regimes that are, it's like that meme of Assad, right? With Assad, who's got, Assad's got to go. Who's got to go, right? That like happened over and over and over again, right? The Hillary Clinton, those forces, they were the ones to suffer from the regime change policy in Syria. It was not popular. And now we're seeing that NATO countries are having such a huge problem domestically, especially the big ones, the leaders, US and the UK. I think it is just a demonstration of how there are no winnable wars at this time. The United States' and NATO's regime of endless war has objectives that can't be met short of nuclear catastrophe. They've truly reached the limits of their relevance, right? When they were able to, in after World War II, cement this kind of economic supremacy and then use military might to stabilize that. That's when the endless war machine was very relevant. But that didn't last very long because these endless wars have continued to mount contradictions on top of each other that now are unsustainable. So in my view, it's all unsustainable. But we know that the war machine, we know that NATO, we know all of these countries are going to go the same path unless stopped. So that's what I think of the boomerang effect, that it shows the irrationality of imperialism and capitalism, but that irrationality is baked into the laws of the system. And that these laws are now driving themselves into the logical conclusion of crisis, just endless crisis, more acute crisis. And I don't suspect that we will have the kind of stability that the system had 70 years ago. I don't think that's ever going to return. Actually, I think that the crises are probably going to become more acute in other areas as well. And it will all be about trade-off and how much can this system last and exist within the trade-offs of all of these crises. Can they ameliorate any of them? I don't believe they can, because I think that the profit motive, right, the system of private property that we live under, right, the highest stage of capitalism, this imperialist order, is actually not sustainable anymore, that it actually has reached its limits, and that the world is moving in a different direction and wants to move in a different direction. And the battle is over whether it will be allowed to. So that's what I think about the boomerang effect. So can you list your favorite independent media outlets? Well, that's so hard. I like Red Indie Media, the project by Lee Camp, because they put together a lot of my favorites. So, of course, Black Agenda Report. I honestly like to scour RT, CGTN, Global Times. They're not, I guess you're going to call it independent, because they're public. I call them publicly owned media, but they're state affiliated, as the imperialists like to say. But I like to get news from them internationally, because they do a good job of just hitting on international developments in a very easy way. And they'll cover things that, they covered BRICS. They covered other things that you won't get in the mainstream press. And then other than that, definitely Multipolarista. Man, these are things that don't flow so easily off the top of my head. I'm so much better when I'm in front of a keyboard thinking. But on YouTube, I like, I like to watch Katie Halper. I like to keep up with what Jimmy is doing, what he's covering. I like to keep up with, I like on the podcast front, Media Roots. I like to follow what Abby Martin's doing. I like to follow a smattering of left media. I like to, Black Alliance for Peace has the AFRICOM Watch Bulletin. I like to get news about that. We have Friends of Socialist China, always scouring all media, Chinese media, non-Chinese media, for news and information on China. So, I would say those are just, if you want favorites, I try not to put I don't have, for me, a lot of news consumption for me is just figuring out what's going on and what the perspectives are. How are people talking about things? Covert Action Magazine, I would definitely follow. I was at their fundraiser, so definitely follow them. They do a lot of good work. So yeah, I mean, that's just off the top of my head. Kasacha News, I mentioned, right, on Latin America as well. Pan-African Newswire by Abayomi Azikiwe, good as well. So good for information on Africa. So I would say that's just a little bit of what I would follow. Oh, also, make sure you're following like Jacqueline Lukman over at Lukman Nation. And By Any Means Necessary. They're always doing great news, interviews, reporting. So follow them as well. So do you think this is going to cause every place in the U.S. to be absolutely packed with riot cops everywhere every year on July 4th? I guess you're talking about the mass shootings. Probably. I mean, I do think that part of the impetus, part of the hysteria over guns is to make it more repressive. Like, that's the response you're most likely to get. You're not really going to get positive reforms, but you're more likely going to get more imperialist, more, I mean, what am I saying? Yes, imperialist, but more repression, more state repression. So I do think that there will be more state repression. All these issues, they're kind of like these flashpoint issues, right? January 6th, gun control, anything that caused some kind of public outrage, outcry, especially a fear, but not for oppressed people, fear among the elite. And not for good reasons. I mean, the chaos of January 6th, the chaos of gun, mass shootings, certainly not something that benefits working people. But usually they try to take advantage of them to forward, malicious aims, right? So that's what I think. I do agree with that. I do think that I don't know about riot cops everywhere, how many, but some kind of escalation in state repression, yes. What are your thoughts on the Duran? I was following the Duran since before it was cool, before the special military operation. I think they have good reporting on Russia. I generally don't have problems with their reporting on Russia. To be honest, I haven't followed them so closely lately, but I've seen some of their interviews of late, and so I think they have decent definitely good analysis on that issue. So I feel like there's a lot of people out there who have good analysis on that issue, who I'm totally fine with following on that issue. There are some, and this is not the Duran, because I haven't followed the Duran on other issues, but there are some who are good on Russia, but, maybe not be good on other things. So that's what I would say with the journalism being done on Russia. Sometimes people who are really understanding of the special military operation may not have the best broad analysis. Brian Berletic, I feel like, has a great broad analysis of geopolitical events. So he's one of the guys. And the same goes with China, right? There's a lot of good people on China, but they may not be most knowledgeable about other things. So like Brian Berletic at the New Atlas, who I've collaborated with here and I hope to collaborate with again, I would say his analysis, for independent media, I would say he's another guy to follow, because geopolitics is so hard to understand. And I generally do like what I get from him. I feel like it's genuine. I feel like it's well researched. And I feel like it generally follows a principled line on the question of war and peace and imperialism. So let's see. Any other questions? Oh, what happened here? Any other questions? Okay. Not seeing any. Maybe I missed one. Sometimes, do you agree that there's no Green New Deal without China and Russia's help? Of course, I agree with that. First of all, Russia is the biggest exporter of energy, really. Oil, of course, is the number one, but gas also is a huge export. So if we're going to move to a green transition, we need Russia. But we can't have Russia targeted like this. If Russia is going to commit to a green economy and to transitioning to renewables and to really move maybe in the direction of China, the international situation and its own prospects for development have to be safeguarded, right? I mean, that's how China was able to do it. How it was able to invest so much in renewables was not because of some magic thing. It's because it was able to develop its economy in a manner that allowed it to both meet the needs of people and to then invest in something like renewables. It wouldn't have been able to do that in 1980, right? When it was not even really an industrial economy. So Russia has to be able and allowed to rebuild, right, after the fall of the Soviet Union, which is what it was trying to do. since 2001. And now there's a siege of Russia economically and militarily. So that has to end. But I do believe that China and Russia need to be in the forefront. I mean, China's already leading the effort to fight climate change. So any kind of effort to fight climate change that doesn't include China is not serious. That's why the Green New Deal, Build Back Better, they're not serious. In part one, they don't acknowledge the working class. They don't acknowledge social movements in the need to transition from capitalism to socialism, right? You can't have a Green New Deal without socialism. You can't have a Green New Deal without addressing the questions of the status of indigenous people, the sovereignty of indigenous people, right? You can't have a Green New Deal without these things. You can't have a Green New Deal under like a corporate dictatorship. And similarly, you can't have a Green New Deal when there's endless war that the government is waging. The United States military is the biggest polluter on the planet. That it's the top polluter. So you can't have a Green New Deal without eliminating and eradicating that problem, right? So yeah, you can't have it without China, and China's the top military target of the United States at this time, right? The key objective for the United States military is to develop a project of containment, to continue to develop this containment project, i.e., move toward regime change, move toward a hot war through a new Cold War. You can't have a Green New Deal with that existing. So without cooperation with China, forget about a Green New Deal. Look what's happening right now with Biden and his sanctions on polysilicon in Xinjiang. That's where all the solar power is produced. Like, that's just suicidal. If you want to transition to renewable energy, you got to lift those sanctions. But the United States prioritizes its warmongering and its propagandizing over any kind of greening or environmental project. The United States isn't serious because imperialism is not serious about this. So, yes, we need Russia and China's help. We need their leadership, and we need the United States to cease its warmongering so that we can truly follow its leadership and we can truly cooperate around this issue. So that was a good question. Thank you. Yes, Lee Camp. Follow Lee Camp. Yes, good independent media there. I am a fan. Good guy. How long before we hit rock bottom? That's impossible to know, but surely rock bottom is coming, right? Surely we can see the trajectory of this system is not upward, it is downward. So I would like to, while this question is very, I guess you could say, basic, it is complicated, and that we can't truly know what that is and how that will be, but we know that we are basically here. We're basically leading and moving in that direction. Rock bottom is surely the direction that this system is going in. So, any other questions? I'm incredibly low energy. Sorry to hear that you don't like my energy. Sorry about that. So I got a lot of lists of good independent media out here. Thanks everyone for doing that in the chat. Let's see. Yeah, all right, that's it for the questions. And look, I mean, thanks for the super chat, Loa Socialisti. Thank you for coming to the stream. I mean, I'm just gonna, this has been a good stream. I don't see any other questions. All right. Well, this was fun. Don't apologize to him. You're doing fine. Yeah, I get a lot of interesting critiques of my performance. I love that. It's so funny. It's like I'm not a jester. It's just hilarious. It's like, yeah, I gotta be a certain way. I'm here talking politics. I'm here talking facts, analysis. I'm not here to like make you laugh, but maybe you'll laugh sometimes. I'm not here to make you cry. I'm here to get you into the struggle. And if you don't want to listen to this, you don't have to. I'm not forcing you. Um, I am who I am, you know, and I do a lot. So, I'm out here not just doing these streams. So, I'm writing columns. I had two. I don't know what it is, actually, in exciting news. And I'll just close with this. So I don't know what it is about July 4th, but I had a lot of requests from Chinese media, right? I wrote two articles. I wrote one for Global Times on the Uyghur, which I need to cover, the Uyghur question, Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. They wanted me to talk about that in the hypocrisy of human rights, the politicization of human rights. And then CGTN asked me to do something similar around the UN Human Rights Council. And so that's what I did for them. I wrote two articles in the span of a couple of days. They like short articles, so it's not, I'm not doing this to totally impress you, but they like 800-word columns or so, which I like 800-word columns. So I did that. I interviewed Carlos and Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz around the same time, but I don't know what it is about Chinese media. Beijing Review contacted me recently, and they want to collaborate more with me. I like Beijing Review, similarly to how I like most media in China. I think they do a good job, giving a very basic primer for people to understand China. And they reached out to me not only to want to collaborate more, but they also said that they want me to come to China soon and to deliberate with a youth group that they've been working with. And so I'm excited about that because I've wanted to go to China. They've said, of course, it's contingent upon the pandemic becoming more open, right? The pandemic restrictions becoming more open. But I mean, that's been my goal. I want to go. So if they can help me go, I am there. And I really do. I don't know what it was, but it was really nice to see because, I'll tell you one thing about this media work. And, from supporters, I get all sorts of affirmation. It's great. And I appreciate all of you. You do, you really make this worthwhile. Right? Your support, whether it's financial or otherwise, is something that's not only needed, but also it's great. It makes me feel like what I'm doing matters. But institutionally, right? Because I don't want to consider you all an institution. Institutionally, there isn't a lot of that. There's a lot more attacks than there are otherwise. So it's always nice when there are institutions that exist out there that are not of the character of attacking everything you do because you're trying to spearhead a movement to facilitate a better situation for all of us. It is great when there are institutions out there saying, "Oh, we appreciate what you're doing because what you're doing, similar to how you supporters appreciate my work, your work is doing something that matters and that's beneficial for human beings." So that's great. So that really elevated me. But I get a lot of critiques, especially in the comment section. People are like, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to be more energetic, you need to whatever be. I don't know what they want. Sometimes it feels like they want me to like get up and dance or tell some jokes. I mean, look, I'm not a comedian. Like I'm not a comedian. Some people who do this work on YouTube, they're comedians. Some people who do this work, they like to, I don't know, they like to become personalities and all of this stuff, but that part doesn't come natural to me, right? The work and the dedication, the analysis, that doesn't come natural, but I work really hard on that. So, I hope you continue to support me otherwise. Anyway, So with that said, could like this stream. I'm gonna head out. Like the stream, subscribe to the channel, hit the notifications bell. Please do subscribe on Patreon at patreon.com/Danny Haiphong. Patreon.com/Danny Haiphong. That's where you can support my work. $60 away from my goal. And it would be great to reach that before the end of this month. We still got a lot of time. So thank you. And I see Big Teal out here worried about me leaving. No, it would be a visit. I'm not going to China permanently as much as I'd want to. That's not in the cards for who knows how long. I'm going to be, I have dedication here. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do. So, but I want to make many trips. I want to make many, many trips. Thank you. They live, we sleep. Appreciate you. I appreciate you gifting my book to people. I really appreciate that. Do you, said Matt Erbst. Appreciate that. Big Teal loves me how I am. Appreciate that. Appreciate all your dedicated support to this work, for keeping on coming back. And yeah, with that said, everyone, peace out. It's a great conversation, and I should be back with you all soon. I'm hoping. I don't know if it'll be tomorrow. I don't know if it'll Friday. I gotta contact Margaret and get in touch with her. But if I'm not, there'll be videos on here. I'm gonna clip some things. And yeah, I'll be back on with you all soon. Just keep a lookout, and peace out. Bye-bye.